So this is a pair of Excel worksheets in a single Excel file that I've created that are similar to things that I've used in the past, a little bit simplified. The first is a lettuce evaluation sheet, and the intent here is to show you how you might use Excel functions to solve real-world problems. So this is a simplified version of something that I used in the past at great length. And so here is a lettuce variety that we were evaluating called Gavilan, a hot weather lettuce variety. And we would measure certain things. And in this, we've got 4 categories. We would measure the height of the core, or that shortened stem in the center of the head after trimming the head properly. We would measure the weight or mass of the head in grams. Mass is the more scientifically accurate term, but in industry, we tend to use the word weight. In metric, there really is no such thing as weight, but I'm not going to worry about that. And then color, there was an evaluation of color. And marketability, is this something that is a saleable head of lettuce, or is it something that should have been or could have been thrown into the ditch or left on the bed unharvested? And when we're doing some of these evaluations, we take all of the heads. And so here's the raw data. We type in the raw data as we go. Nothing fancy here. It's just raw data being typed in as we go. Then we have the summary information. The average, which is just equals the average of that entire column from C6 through C15. It adds them all up, divides by the total number of cells being averaged. And you have to be careful when you're looking at averages and other statistical data, what happens with a blank cell versus what happens with a 0. They're not the same thing, and I don't want to get into it now, but when I test functions, one of the big gotchas, what happens if there is a 0 value or a blank cell with nothing in it? Is that blank cell being counted as a 0? In some cases, no. In some cases, yes. So for example, well, no, I don't want to get into it right now. Then there's the standard deviation, and the standard deviation is a statistical measure on how variable that is. Now, this number doesn't mean anything to most people unless you've had statistics, but the bigger the standard deviation, the more variable the number is, the more the number's bouncing around. And you want a stable number when you're harvesting crops, whatever they are. I want a low standard deviation. What is appropriate? That's a statistical question, not an Excel question. So I won't even get into what standard deviation values are good, but you should know that they exist as a statistical measure of how variable the numbers are. And the size of standard deviation is going to depend on the size of your numbers. You notice that the standard deviation for these numbers in the 50s through 80s is around 10. The standard deviation for these numbers in the hundreds is around 50. So that doesn't immediately tell me that this is much more variable. It's based on larger numbers. So I have all of the averages and all of the standard deviations for every one of the first 3 values, but it doesn't make sense to me in this category to determine whether or not I have an average for my marketability number. That's not something I'm looking at. So I left that blank. It just didn't make logical sense to have an average. What am I going to do with that? But for the fresh market, if I'm going to be putting this head of lettuce onto a grocery store shelf, is it good for that? Am I happy? Does it meet my criteria? And that is a much better measure of this marketability number. So how do I evaluate this? Instead of saying this particular head of lettuce or variety has an average and standard deviation, I'm just going to say, could I put this on the supermarket shelf? Yes or no? If not, if it's not good enough for the supermarket shelf, could I still put it into the processor to go into a bag of salad? Or is this a head that should be just left unharvested, leave it in the field? And that's unmarketable. So processing, it doesn't have to be beautiful, but it has to be healthy. It can have minor shape defects, perhaps, and still be fine to go in a bag of salad because it's just going to be chopped up anyway. But it doesn't have to be as beautiful as the head of lettuce going in the supermarket, sitting there for somebody to grab. All right. So we're counting the numbers. How many ones are there? That's all I'm carrying. Count if this column in F6 through F15, is a 1. How many are ones? Count if they are 2s, and count if they are 3s. So this tells me what I really want to know. I've got 8 ones. So out of 10 heads of lettuce, 8 of them would have gone to a grocery store or the processor. They're perfect, or at least perfect enough to be marketable. 1 of them was on the border, but would have been fine, should have been selected to go into a processing plant to turn into chopped salad. And 1 of them should have been left in the ditch. Now, I would like to have them all ones, but that's not realistic. Maybe with a sample size of 10, that's realistic. This is, again, a very small sample just for illustration. But in a field, in a sample size of 100, of course, you're not going to harvest everything all the time. There are going to be some that just aren't worth taken out of the field. They're not quality. They got a problem, a blemish, a disease, something that makes them unmarketable. So again, I'm using a new function here, the count if. I'm only counting cells, and I'm not adding up the totals. You'll notice that the number 2s, when I count 2s, I don't add the 2s. I'm not doing sum if, add them up if. I'm just saying count. So every 2 gets a single count. Then how many 2s are there? There's only 1 2 in the bunch. How many 3s are there? There's only 1 3 in the bunch. So I'm counting, very different than sum or sum if. All right. And similarly, I've got another variety here, sharpshooter, the exact same layout. I've got my averages and standard deviations. There's a little more variation. They're not as uniform as the gabalan, but they're bigger. 442 versus 596. It's a bigger head, so it's got some pros being bigger. And it's got some con being a little bit more unvariable. Now, is that, or a little bit more variable, rather? A little bit better color, perhaps? But I got some other problems. Because of the variability issues, I've only got 5 of them that are marketable. Count if it's a 1. Only half of them meet my grocery store marketability in this particular trial. How many are 2s? Well, I've got 3 of them. You can see these 1, 2, 3 of them are 2s. So my total, if I'm going to this processing plant, they both are the same. The gabalan was 8 going to, no, actually the gabalan was 9, but this one's 8 going to the market in a packaged salad, a processing plant. 8 are good for processing, because the fresh market are clearly not only good enough for the grocery store, they're also good for processing. So 2 of them would have been left in the ditch. Got another thing. What about, is the core height acceptable? Is the weight acceptable? Is the color acceptable? Is the marketability acceptable? So I can have a very simple test using the AND function. We've already learned about the AND function. But I could just say, hey, core height has to be less than 85 or forget it. 85 millimeters is pretty long. Once I get over there, I start to say, and what am I checking? J16, the average core height. Is it acceptable? And this one says no, the core heights are too high. These plants are starting to bolt or grow too much, and the cores are a problem. And so this one failed core height. Is the weight acceptable? Definitely. Is the color acceptable? Definitely. And marketability acceptable? I need, for this one, what do I consider marketability? I want M18 plus 19, the fresh market plus processing, to be greater than or equal to 9. I need at least 90% marketable. Did they pass? No, I only had 80% or 8. They're not greater than or equal to. Look, I've got greater than or equal to 9. When I add these 2 together, is this greater than or equal to 9? No, it's 8. And I've got another solution. This is solving the problem using the AND function. What if I solve the problem using the IF function? And with the IF function, I have core height. Is it acceptable? No. How did I come up to that conclusion? I use the same logical test, J16, the average core height is less than or equal to 85. 1 is a pass, 0 is a fail. And instead of 1 and 0, I could have put, quote, pass, end quote, and then open quote, fail, close quote, instead of 1 and 0. It would have been the same thing. It's just, how do I want to see those numbers? And I could use conditional formatting if I wanted to. So if I go to home, conditional formatting, highlight rules greater than 0, are going to be, which would be 1. Or actually, let me do equal to, since I'm returning exact values. Highlight equal to 1 is going to be green. Equal to 1 is going to be green. And I'll add a second layer of conditional formatting. Equal to 0 is going to stay red. Bingo. Now, not only is my if function returning the value that I tell it to, but the conditional formatting is highlighting them very quickly to easily spot things that are a problem in red. And the total, the same thing. I've already got some conditional formatting on that, marking that as a problem. And what am I doing? I'm just adding these up. And here I want to have a value, and I don't know what the value is for conditional formatting. On this one, manage rules, and I've got a value. If it's less than 4, it's red. If it's equal to 4, it's green. So if you get them all, it's green. If something is wrong, if there's an acceptability problem with any one of those, it'll turn red. Again, flagging this. For simple data like this, do I really need conditional formatting? It's pretty obvious. It's a small set of tables. But in a larger data set, conditional formatting is very helpful because you can spot things very quickly in red or green or whatever you want to do, rather than trying to manually visually pick out the trues and falses or something, or the numbers, the totals, pick out anything that's not a 4, that's less than 4. Conditional formatting is faster and easier on the eyes. So that's one example. And I'm going to stop this and before going to the second example, take a short break.